Welcome back to Now Let's Be Honest. I'm David Tate, and this is another episode of Is It Biblical, where we walk through each episode of The Chosen and determine which parts are biblical, historical, probable, plausible, hypothetical, improbable, ahistorical, and heretical. Today we're going to be looking at the final half of the final episode of Season 5, so let's get to it. Over in the olive grove, Jesus enters with Peter, James, and John, only to become overwhelmed with emotion. Turning to John, he says that he is so sad, an allusion to what John had told Peter in the previous episode. His following words are lifted from Scripture. "My soul is deeply grieved, to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me." Big James argues that they should probably get a doctor if he's about to die from sorrow, but John realizes that it isn't the sorrow itself which will lead to Jesus' death. When Jesus nearly collapses again, Peter says that he's going to send for a doctor, but Jesus stops him. He says that the great physician himself will minister to him, which is interesting because typically the title great physician is used to speak of Jesus, not the Father. But in this instance, since it is Jesus being ministered to, I guess it technically works. He simply asks for them to stay, keep watch, and be near him. That's all he needs. He tells them he is going to withdraw further into the garden to pray and asks them to stay awake and make sure that no one can see or hear him. They want to do more, but he merely asks them to keep watch. And with that, he goes deeper into the garden. About a stone's throw away, Jesus falls to his knees at a rock, his posture reminiscent of Heinrich Kaufmann's painting, Christ in Gethsemane. The majority of the rest of the episode serves as an expanded adaptation of the following scriptural moment. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved, to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me." And he went a little beyond them, and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, "So you men could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away again a second time and prayed, saying, "My Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. And he left them again, and went away and prayed a third time, saying the same thing once more. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us go. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand." In the scene, Jesus begins to pray the Lord's Prayer. "Our Father in heaven, hallowed is your name." However, he stops there and says that the time has come, because he is about to undertake the actions that helps bring about God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. He says that he is here and ready, but he doesn't think he can do it. The Father is asking too much of him. He lowers his head as his fingers scrape against the stone, and I think the show did a fantastic job of demonstrating the divinity and humanity at war within Jesus, longing to save himself, yet longing to serve the Father even more. He pleads to the Father and asks for strength, that the Father would make him stronger than he currently is. As he seeps deeper into his anguish and nearer to the ground, his posture begins to look more reminiscent of Vasily Perov's painting, Christ in Gethsemane. As Jesus cries out in anguish, suddenly he is distracted by the noise of someone chopping wood. This marks the beginning of a series of 3 visions that Christ receives in the garden, each of which are a fictional addition to the show intended to communicate something about Christ's purpose in his suffering. As he follows the noise, Jesus comes across an old man revealed to be none other than Abraham, preparing the firewood so that he can offer his son Isaac as an offering to the Lord as detailed in Genesis chapter 22. Abraham, like Jesus in the garden, is torn up over what he is about to do. Interestingly, the closest thing Scripture offers us when it comes to a psychological analysis of Abraham's anxiety over the situation comes from the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, which tells us that he considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he also received him back. However, in 1843, the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard published the book Fear and Trembling, which is an extended meditation wherein he attempts to understand Abraham's psychological state during his journey to Moriah to sacrifice Isaac. Definitely worth a read. In the scene, Abraham gathers the bundle of sticks and, resigned to his fate, lays it on the shoulders of his son. The interaction that follows is lifted from the text of Genesis. Then Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So the two of them walked on together. In the scene, Jesus mutters the words he wishes he could say to Isaac. He doesn't go through with it, young Isaac. We spared you. It was a test. The inclusion of the word "we" here is brilliant, serving as a clear assertion of Christ's eternal deity even as he endures the most human trial of his earthly advent. With that, Jesus lifts up the prayer that we read in Scripture. "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." He notes that they spared Isaac. Can they not spare him? He prays to be delivered if at all possible, but then falls to his knees and submits to the will of God. He begins the Lord's Prayer again. "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done, not mine." With that, he ties the Lord's Prayer into his own prayer. He tells the Father that he trusts in him, then arises to go back to check on the apostles. He finds all three of them sleeping, and by the looks of it, James is going to have a major crick in his neck. Looking agitated, he wakes them up just as we see in Scripture. He asks them if they remember how he taught them to pray, alluding once again to the Lord's Prayer. "Lead us not into temptation." He tells them to watch and pray that they not enter into temptation. John notices that Jesus called Peter Simon, but Jesus moves along. He says that he knows that their spirit is willing, but their flesh is weak. Peter reassures him that they won't fail again, but Jesus says that while he knows they want to, the reality of the body prevents them from doing so. He reminds them of the helper that he promised to them during the Last Supper. Hardship is coming for them, so they must stay alert and pray. And with that, he departs as Big James slaps himself awake. It's at this point that I should probably make another shameless plug that I mentioned a few episodes ago. If you go on Spotify or anywhere that streams music, I have an album called Awake O Sleeper with 14 songs all inspired by the night that Christ was betrayed. Amongst those song titles are things such as Not My Will, Watch and Pray, Awake O Sleeper, The Spirit is Willing, and The Flesh is Weak, all of which are songs inspired by the scenes unfolding in this episode. It seemed relevant to bring up, so I figured I'd mention it. Having withdrawn away once again, Jesus kneels at the stone and begins to pray. He mutters the same words as before, but as he does so, an ominous fog drifts in from behind him. This scene, in my opinion, was vaguely reminiscent of the opening scenes of the Passion of the Christ. Eventually, Jesus arises and begins to walk through the fog, walking through the garden until he steps on something that cracks beneath his foot. If you thought that he went through the wardrobe and entered into Narnia, you're in for a rude awakening, because the scene he arrives in is as far as it gets from a snowy wood with lampposts and fawns with umbrellas. Instead, Jesus emerges into a valley overflowing with dried up bones, skeletons, and dead carcasses everywhere. Those familiar with the Old Testament prophets will recognize that this is a scene from the book of Ezekiel. As he wanders through the devastation and looks around, he finds Ezekiel himself standing there. He calls out Ezekiel's name, and Ezekiel's response to his name being heard would suggest that this isn't merely a vision in the context of the show. Rather, Christ has transcended space and time to engage in the conversation that we read about in the biblical text. Ezekiel smiles upon seeing his Lord, and Jesus approaches him. The encounter that follows is lifted from the text of Ezekiel chapter 37. "The hand of Yahweh was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of Yahweh and caused me to rest in the middle of the valley. And it was full of bones. He caused me to pass among them all around, and behold, there were very many on the surface of the valley, and behold, they were very dry. He said to me, 'Son of man, can these bones live?' And I answered, 'O Lord Yahweh, you know.'" It's important to note here that in the context of Ezekiel, the prophet is speaking to Yahweh himself. In the show, it's Jesus. That's a clear attestation that Jesus is himself God in the flesh. Jesus and Ezekiel embrace, and Ezekiel nods reassuringly. We don't see the rest of the interaction play out in the show, but Scripture records the words that followed. "Then he said to me, 'Prophesy over these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahweh. Thus says Lord Yahweh to these bones, Behold, I will cause breath to enter you, that you may come to life. I will put sinews on you, make flesh come up upon you, cover you with skin, and put breath in you, that you may come alive. And you will know that I am Yahweh.'" Sure enough, this is the very reason that Jesus suffers in the garden. He is laying his life down so that dead bones can come to life. He will die so that many might live. A stone's throw away, Peter, James, and John have fallen asleep once again. Jesus descends the staircase to find them sleeping. While he initially looks annoyed by this, by the time he descends to the bottom of the staircase and takes another look at them, he sees nothing but young boys too little to know better. It's actually a really sweet scene. He forgives them, for they know not what they do. He feels compassion for them as they sleep and doesn't bother waking them as he retreats again once more to pray and to endure this suffering all alone without the help of those that he loves the most. In the background, once again, the instrumental version of Psalm 118 continues to play. Deeper in the garden, Jesus is once again overwhelmed in his anguish. He wanders around and examines the trees for a moment before again going to the same rock as several times before. He falls upon it and is sweating profusely, his sweat appearing like drops of blood, just as Luke records. People debate what Luke meant by those words, if he was suggesting that Jesus' sweat was merely like drops of blood, or if he was actually sweating blood. It is possible, under extremely high-stress situations, to physically sweat blood, and The Chosen seems to have chosen to straddle the line on this, visually depicting things in such a way that it could go either way. Jesus repeats the same prayer over and over again, asking the Father to remove the cup, yet submitting to his will regardless. Although his words are the same, it's evident that things are building to a zenith. Jesus knows that he is running out of time and his sacrifice is close at hand. Just as he is seemingly about to buckle under the immense weight falling upon him, somebody walks in from behind and places a hand upon his head. When he looks up, he sees none other than his earthly father, Joseph, who holds him and comforts him. Most likely this is a reference to Luke's account of the scene, where he records, "Now an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him." The word angel just means messenger, so the angel spoken of in Luke's text doesn't necessarily have to be the sort of angels that we typically think of when we hear the word. And I suppose that it is plausible, albeit improbable, that the messenger sent by God was a dead relative returning to offer comfort to Jesus in his time of need. That being said, while the scene is really sweet, and I do really like the actor who plays Joseph, and it's always good to see him return, I really don't know how to feel about this scene. I have mixed emotions. On one hand, I really like the scene on a personal note, because if you know anything about my backstory, the scene of Jesus praying in the garden is extremely relevant to my own experience when I had to face my own dad's death. I'm not going to elaborate on it right now, because I've talked about it in plenty of my other previous videos, but long story short, it does actually resonate with me on a very personal level, and so I like it for that reason. At the same time, I do feel like this sends a very strange message. In the context of this show, Jesus has spent half of this episode praying to his Father in heaven and asking for strength. And then suddenly Joseph, his father who, by means of being deceased, technically resides in heaven, shows up to strengthen him. For those who are familiar with Scripture and with our theology about who Jesus is and who the Father is and whatnot, it isn't hard to recognize the distinction. God the Father is sending Jesus, his earthly father, in a time of need. But for those who might not be as familiar with the biblical account, it might unintentionally lead them to believe that Joseph is one and the same with the Father that Jesus has been praying to this entire time, having come down to comfort his son. I don't know. I haven't really seen people making that connection, but it's something that I thought of back when I first saw the episode, and I haven't been able to unsee it since. Like I said, I do really like the scene, but I could see how it might confuse people since it really isn't explained in the context of the show. In the scene, Joseph tells Jesus that he will be waiting for him. Jesus laughs, comforted by the thought, but then suddenly he finds himself alone once again. He lets out a long breath, knowing what comes next. Rising to his feet, Jesus walks once more through the garden, walking past the firelight and returning to the apostles who are still asleep. He awakens Simon, who immediately apologizes. Simon awakens James, and James awakens John. This time, however, Jesus says that it is enough. As we read in Scripture, "Rise, it's time to go. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners." He repeats the word sinners with a sense of disbelief, then turns around and begins guiding them from the garden. As they walk, his words are also lifted from Scripture. "Look, my betrayer is here." Jesus and the big three exit the olive grove just as a cohort of soldiers with torches and clubs approach from the distance. The other apostles, most of whom had managed to stay awake, see the soldiers coming. They rouse those who had fallen asleep and make their way towards Jesus. As the crowd approaches, we see that Cophni and his band of malcontents are walking in their dust. The apostles rush towards Jesus, but he tells them to stay back. Now is probably as good a time as any to highlight that, as depicted in the show, the band of soldiers who apprehend Jesus were most likely temple guards, not Roman soldiers as is typically assumed and as has been depicted in previous iterations of the same event. The Romans wouldn't get involved until the next morning when the Jews handed Jesus over to Pilate. In the scene, Jesus looks up to heaven as he prays for strength, and the guards come to a standstill in front of him. The scene that follows is lifted straight from Scripture. "And while he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, came up, and with him was a large crowd with swords and clubs, who came from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now he who was betraying him gave them a sign, saying, 'Whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him.' And immediately Judas went to Jesus and said, 'Greetings, Rabbi,' and kissed him. And Jesus said to him, 'Friend, do what you have come for.' Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him." In the scene, Malchus steps forward, then looks in the direction of the traitor. Judas steps forth, looking very much like Anakin in Revenge of the Sith. The apostles, having seemingly neglected to notice that Judas was still not with them, all look shocked as Judas steps out. Everyone is speechless. Judas looks around at all of them, but when Malchus motions for him to get moving, Judas lowers his hood and begins to walk forward. The apostles stand there shocked as Judas approaches Jesus and looks him in the eyes. Judas calls Jesus Rabbi. Jesus calls Judas my friend. After a moment, he tells him to do what he has come to do. With tears in his eyes, Judas leans in and kisses Jesus on the cheek. And with that, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. The scene cuts to black, and season 5 reaches its end. And that is going to bring this episode of Is It Biblical to an end. But we're not entirely done with this series for this season, because what you can expect next is I'm actually going to take all the episodes of Is It Biblical from season 5 and compile them together into one extra long Holy Week deep dive. So if you like videos like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you know when more videos like this are coming your way. My name is David Tate. This is Now Let's Be Honest. Be sure to keep a smile on your face. Don't let anybody steal your joy. And remember who you are. And we will be back soon to dive deeper into the world of The Chosen. See y'all later.